G'day guys, and today I'll be doing my tips for round 15. The first game we have up is a huge game at the MCG on the Friday night, which sees Carlton up against Collingwood, the old-fashioned rivalry. Collingwood were pretty ordinary last week against Port Adelaide, or maybe Port Adelaide were just really good. And Carlton they got their biggest loss of the season against Sydney, which was also in torrential conditions. Last time these sides went up against each other, it was Collingwood getting the job done by 17 points. And it's always a tough game to pick this one because form and ladder position generally don't matter. And it's a bit like Geelong and Hawthorn, except not so one-sided, if that makes any sense. I like Carlton here because their improvement over the year has been pretty good, and they just look better than Collingwood in general. Collingwood have been fairly disappointing, it has to be said. It's a toss of the coin though. I'm just going to go with Carlton by 7 points. Another potential toss of the coin game here is Western Bulldogs going up against the GWS, who will fancy themselves a chance this week at Star Trek Oval. Last time it was the Bulldogs getting the job done by 42 points. And GWS last week against the Kangas weren't too great. They lost by 86 points. And the Bulldogs were very brave. They were I think they were about 44 points down. And with about 11 minutes to play, they knuckled down and brought it back to 3 points with just under 2 minutes, but couldn't quite get the win in the end, but very brave fight nonetheless. I think the Bulldogs will be keen as anyone to get a win on the board this week, and GWS also probably fancy their chances as well, as I've said. However, I'm going to go with the Bulldogs, not convincingly though, but 27 points is the final margin, I reckon. The Kangaroos and the Tigers go head-to-head at Etihad Stadium on the Saturday afternoon. The last time these sides went up against each other, it was the Kangaroos getting the job done. Very close game, it was 4 points in it, and they obviously got it done in the end. Whenever these two sides play, you never really know who's going to win. It's a bit like Carlton and Collingwood, or like Forrest Gump's box of chocolates. You never quite know what you're going to get. North had an easy win over GWS, and the Tigers had a pretty comprehensive 64-point victory over the Saints. I just think Richmond look a bit better than North in general. And I guess the ladder position shows that as well. The Roos form early on in the year has been okay, but just haven't got the wins to go their way. Could go either way, but I'm going to go with the Tigers by 18 points. Brisbane and Gold Coast fight it out at the Gabba late Saturday afternoon. Brisbane couldn't quite back up their win, their wonderful win a few weeks ago, and they lost to the Hawks by just under 10 goals. On the other hand, Gold Coast, they were pretty competitive against Adelaide for 3 quarters, but lost in the end by 28 points. The last time these sides went up against each other, it was Brisbane sneaking home a 2-point win. I think if Brisbane can beat them at Metricon, they can beat them at the Gabba. It should be a good game though. I'm going to go with Brisbane by 14 points. Always a muchly anticipated game, this one. It's Geelong v Hawthorn, hosting at the MCG on the Saturday night. Geelong were pretty exceptional last week against Fremantle, getting a 41-point victory. And Fremantle usually don't lose by that much, but they were alright at Simmons Stadium. And Hawthorn notched up a pretty neat 58-point victory. The last time these sides went up against each other, it was Geelong coming back from 5 goals down to record a 7-point victory, and Hawthorn's first and only loss of the year so far. They still haven't beaten the Cats since that wonderful day in 2008. But I feel as though that day that we lose to them is getting closer and closer. Even though Hawthorn are on a magnificent winning streak, I think I remember it was in 2010 it might have been, they were on a 7, 8 or 9 game winning streak. And they played Geelong and it didn't quite come through for them. And they ended their winning streak, so even though they're going alright, it may or may not work in their favour. Geelong may be better suited after playing a tough contested game against Fremantle last week, but I don't think that'll have a big impact. And yeah, it's too tough to call every time, but I have to go with Geelong. They've won the last 10 against them, so hopefully they can make it 11. And yeah, I'm going with the Cats this one by 1 point. Adelaide and West Coast host another sudden death match on the Saturday night at Amy Stadium. Last week, Adelaide were challenged for 3 quarters but got over the line against Gold Coast. And West Coast slipped another possible victory. They lost the Bombers by 7 points. They were a bit stiff. Last time it was Adelaide getting a pretty easy 49-point victory. And it's always a tough game to pick this one because, and especially at the moment, because both sides aren't really travelling that well at the moment. West Coast side on paper looks quite terrific really. Their forward line just looks so dangerous, but they just haven't been getting the wins on the board, which is a bit unfortunate because they've got so much talent. It's in Adelaide, so it might favour the Crows a bit, but I think the Eagles might be able to conjure an unlikely victory. They'll be keen as must to get back on the winners list, and they have also shown that they can be pretty competitive with some good sides away from home. So I'm going to tip the Eagles by 10 points. Sydney head over to Melbourne to take on Melbourne at the MCG on the Sunday. Last week, Sydney were absolutely terrific against Carlton. They were challenged and they got a nice 22-point victory at the SCG in shocking conditions. And Melbourne delivered a 3-point upset to the Dogs, but they nearly lost the plot in the last quarter. And the last time these sides went up against each other, it was Sydney absolutely killing the Demons by 101 points. I do remember a few years ago when Melbourne delivered a 73-point thrashing to the Swans at the MCG, so that was a real surprise. But yeah, I can't really see Sydney losing. I don't really see Melbourne winning. So I think Sydney will be pretty comfortable here. I'm going to go with the Swans by 55 points. Fremantle hosts the Saints at Patterson Stadium on the Sunday. Fremantle couldn't quite contain the Cats last week and just couldn't simply kick a big enough score. And the Saints, they just got a bit of a thrashing by the Tigers. They couldn't keep up with them either. The last time these sides went up against each other, it was Fremantle surprising everyone at Etihad Stadium, getting a 13-point victory. Fremantle will most likely get Pavlich, Sandilands, Spur, Barlow and David Mundy back into the team, so it looks like they're going to be at full strength, and from the Saints' point of view, probably seemingly impossible to beat, especially over in the West. I don't think the Dockers will have any concerns here. I think they'll win by 43 points. The last game of the round is Essendon and Port Adelaide locking horns at Etihad Stadium. Essendon were terrific last week. They were 23 points down just before three-quarter time, and they managed to overcome the Eagles by 7 points. And Port Adelaide were equally impressive, getting a nice 35-point victory over the Magpies in their first win over Collingwood since 2007. Last time it was Essendon getting the job done by 50 points at AAMI Stadium. I remember a few years ago when Port Adelaide were actually doing alright against Essendon, but they've won the last 3 on them. And I think I'll give Port half a chance, but I think Essendon will be pretty comfortable at home. It'll definitely show where both sides are at. I'm going to tip the Bombers though by 31 points. So there's my tips for round 15. And I did not get a game right on Saturday last week. See, that's what happens when you go with upsets. They come back to bite you. But anyway, feel free to comment your tips for this round. And thank you for watching the video. Like if you enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys all soon.